Hey guys, it's Reilly. So, in the last episode, I talked about how I study Japanese by myself, how I do self-study. And I mentioned at the end of the episode that this one will be about talking to Japanese people and actually practicing Japanese live, if you will. And so yeah, that's what we are going to talk about this time. Here we go. So when I first came to Japan, I lived in a share house. So when I moved in there, it was maybe 4 or 5 other people. I think there were probably 4 other roommates, and then the owner also was there sometimes. He had a separate apartment somewhere else, but he was often at the share house. And 3 or 4 of the people who lived there were Japanese, and the other person was actually Japanese Brazilian. So he was born and raised in Brazil, but was his parents or grandparents or something were from Japan. But anyway, nobody in the share house spoke English and everybody spoke Japanese. So it was my first real test of if I could speak Japanese. And basically, I couldn't. I mean, I knew how to introduce myself and, I could say "Ohayo gozaimasu" or "Arigatou gozaimasu" and stuff, really simple stuff that was easy to say. But saying anything more complicated than kind of those set phrases was difficult. But luckily, the Brazilian guy, his name was Mao. Mao was also studying Japanese and at a much higher level. I think he was studying for JLPT level 1, so the highest level. But he gave me some tips on how to study, and he was really patient with my slow and bad Japanese at that time. And the owner of the share house, his name was, I'll say K. It was Keiichiro. I guess I'll say his real name. But he was also really kind and really understanding about my slow Japanese. And he would try to speak a little bit of English, but his English was maybe only a little bit better than my Japanese. But that first, I lived there for about a month and a half. And so that time was really important for me kind of understanding that Japanese is not just a language you study, but is a language that you communicate with. I think, the same is true for English. A lot of my students, kind of think that English is a language that just exists in the textbooks or only in the classroom, and you don't use it to communicate. Actually, when I work at a high school sometimes, and high school and junior high school. So we were teaching a junior high school class, me and the Japanese English teacher, and I think it was before the class, the Japanese teacher and I were just chatting about something, maybe the weekend or something like that. And a student comes up to the Japanese teacher and says to him, "Huh? You can speak English?" And he's the English teacher. Of course he can speak English. But the student was surprised because they thought that he's good at kind of test English. He's good at knowing English for a test, but he's not they didn't even imagine that he could actually communicate in English with an English speaker. But anyway, that's just a funny story. So I lived in the share house for a month or a month and a half. And then eventually I got a job and I moved into my own apartment and started teaching kids. And when I started teaching kids, I started learning kind of new Japanese that I had never heard before, like onomatopoeia, which I don't know if I can spell. Give me one second. I think it is onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, which is gyongo or gitaigo in Japanese. So, like what my favorite one is gatangoton. I learned that from my students, the sound that a train makes, which in English is chugga chugga or chugga chugga choo choo for a train. And so, yeah, I started learning new kinds of Japanese. And from the kids, I also started learning sanuki-ben, like saying nanshon instead of nani o shiteru no. And saying shoru and ikkyoru and stuff like that instead of using shiteru or itteiru. So yeah, I was learning new kinds of Japanese from my students. But of course, in the classroom, I'm not supposed to speak Japanese to the students. They're supposed to think of me as someone they speak English with. So I try not to speak too much Japanese in the classroom. But when I go out in the world, out to the shops or something, then of course I have to use Japanese. And probably after my first year in Japan, I had enough Japanese to order at a restaurant with no problem, or to go to a convenience store, a konbini, with no problems. And kind of daily life became easy. And actually, maybe it was after that first year or year and a half that my Japanese kind of stopped getting better, because I didn't need to learn it for my daily life anymore. And at this time, my group of friends was mostly other English speakers and a few Japanese people who knew English or wanted to learn English. So most of the conversations I had, if I was at a bar or hanging out with my friends, would have been in English. And that's something that I regret a little bit, that I spent so much time in Japan not speaking Japanese. Of course, I want to speak English, and with my friends who are from England or Australia or America or whatever, of course, we are going to speak English. But I feel a little bad that with my Japanese friends, I used to not speak Japanese so much. But maybe more recently, my friend group has started to include more Japanese people who maybe don't speak English so much or are not so interested in learning English. Some of these are Yuki's friends, or who are friends of my friends, my Japanese friends. And so talking to them, I've had to really use Japanese and at a higher level. So it's been kind of recent, maybe the last 2 years or something like that. I've been really trying to speak Japanese more often with Japanese people. And one of my closest friends, his name is, I'll just say his name is Kay, not the same guy from the share house, but a different guy. He is really interested in learning English, and he's studying a lot, but he's also really generous with helping me with Japanese. So if I have any questions, I always ask him about it, and he is really good about explaining things to me. I have another friend, I'll call her H, and she actually used to live in South Africa. And so when she was there for, maybe a year and a half or something. When she was there, she only spoke English, obviously, with other people in South Africa. But now that she's back in Japan, she refuses to speak any English with me at all. Even though she's perfectly good at English, her English is great, but when she talks to me or any other English speakers that she knows can speak some Japanese, she refuses to speak English to them. And even if we speak English to her, she'll respond in Japanese. So she's been really helpful with forcing me to speak Japanese more, and definitely listen to it more, because she only speaks Japanese to us. And yeah, so every once in a while we'll have a group of friends who all want to speak Japanese together. Some English speakers and some Japanese people will mix. Sometimes I like to have people over for like lunch or like a barbecue or something like that. And usually it's mostly English. And that's kind of the difficult thing, because I have some friends who don't speak Japanese so well. And so if there's one person who doesn't speak Japanese so well and everybody else can speak English or wants to speak English, then the language of the conversation will automatically A-U-T-O-M-A-T-I-C-L-A-L, sorry, let me do that one more time. Automatically, A-U-T-O-M-A-T-I-C-A-L-L-Y, the language will automatically become English just because it's the easiest way to communicate. But sometimes if it's a group of people where everybody wants to speak Japanese, even if many people can't speak Japanese that well, like me, we will try to do it all in Japanese with as little English as possible. And it's amazing to me how tiring that can be. I remember one time I went on a short day trip with Yuki and my friend H, who I mentioned, and one other friend, and we went out to Western Kagawa. So I don't know what, a little more than an hour drive away. And so it was 3 people who speak Japanese perfectly and me. And so they were speaking Japanese to each other really quickly, and then when they were talking to me, it would be a little more slowly. But we were out, for the whole day, maybe 8 hours of just Japanese. And, usually when I go and hang out with my friends, I don't really get tired. It's just kind of hanging out with my friend. It's kind of relaxing. But this time, because I had to speak Japanese for the whole day, when I got home, I was exhausted, just completely tired. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. So I think usually this was Sunday, and I don't have work on Monday, so it was a weekend for me. And usually I would stay up kind of late on a Sunday, like at least 1 o'clock. But I think we probably got home around 8:30, and I was probably asleep by 10:30, which is very rare for me. But anyway, yeah, so that's how I learn Japanese. I speak with friends, and I'm hoping to do it more and more in the future. All right, so thank you for listening. Bye.